Self-Cannibalism. When I was 9 years old, I thought fighting was cool because of action cartoons I watched on a Sunday morning. Needless to say, my mind quickly changed as I trembled in the corner, watching Ashley's dad slam Ashley's mom's head on his 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 mom. I trembled. Ashley didn't even flinch. She was used to it. In hindsight, I should have told somebody. I knew there was something horribly wrong with Ashley's family. But when I brought up the prospect of telling some authority figure what was happening, Ashley wouldn't even hear it. She begged me not to tell anyone. Yet I persisted. Where begging failed, threatening succeeded. She told me she wouldn't be my friend anymore. I was a shy, and obviously stupid kid, and I didn't want to lose the only friend I had. I kept my mouth shut. There was a certain rhythm to each visit I made. A certain protocol. Chain of events, perhaps. Ashley and I would knock and wait for her mother to let us in. I despised that fake, plastic smile of hers. There was not a single spark of genuine emotion behind those thin, flaccid lips and those hollow, sunken orbs of misery. Now, where was I? Yes. Chain of events. Upon entering, Ashley's mother would lock the door behind us and we would march straight to the corner of the living room where Ashley kept a spacious cardboard box that wasn't utilized to even 1/5 of its capacity. That small bundle of hand-me-downs was hardly enough for one childhood. Priorities were priorities. Though, how could Ashley expect a new toy if her family was running low on necessities? Like that clear, foul-smelling liquid that her father seemed to cherish more than his wife and child. I grabbed my favorite item from that humble pile. A pair of binoculars with a camo pattern on them. From our little playground in the corner, we had a clear view on the open door of the little kitchenette. Just big enough for a stove, counter and a small asymmetrical dining table with 3 chairs accompanying it. Then, the first deviation of the rigid protocol happened. Usually, the crooked figure of a run-down homemaker was obscured. We could only see her thin shadow dancing across the table as she hurriedly prepared dinner. I blinked in disbelief a few times before gazing back to Ashley. She, too, was surprised. Ashley's mother was slumped over in one of the chairs, her head resting on the table. Almost unnoticeable twitches accompanied her burdened sighs. Slowly, meticulously she guided her hands to her lap before grasping something and placing it on the table, in front of herself. It was a small, clear vase with a single rose inside. All my time I knew her, I had never seen Ashley's mom decorating anything. She simply didn't have the time for such an endeavor. I remember thinking to myself that that rose was an obvious fake. Where on earth would roses black as coal from the steam to the petals grow? She rose up and straightened her posture on that chair before pulling the vase a little bit closer to herself. Her left hand disappeared under the table yet again, only to re-emerge seconds later holding something. I didn't realize what it was until she guided her right hand above the vase and turned her wrist upwards and placed the slender, curved object on it before furiously sliding it across. She turned her wrist downward and allowed the crimson liquid to feed the rose. Not a slight hint of pain stood on her face. Every single distinguishable feature she had transformed itself into a shining beacon of determination and focus. As blood went downwards, grim, thick smoke erupted upwards from the petals, before the engulfing curtain overshadowed her face. I could see a quick smile flash across her pale lips. Footsteps echoed through the house and Ashley and I exchanged a worried look. Was her dad home already? Those footsteps didn't sound like they belonged to her father. Papa is home, she whispered. I'm going to greet him, she concluded, standing up. A chilling realization compelled me to grab Ashley's arm and pull her back down. Ashley, I muttered, the door is locked. Footsteps echoed through the separate hallway that connected the kitchen to the main door. The chair slid out by itself, emanating an uneasy screech before a black figure seated herself opposite of Ashley's mother. It was tall and slender, and it bore a distinct note of femininity within it. Its gracious slender figure was topped off by a wide-brimmed hat, as dark as the rest of it. I raised the binoculars to my eyes. Now, I could see the black smoke was slowly emanating from the figure itself. Behind the figure, Ashley's mother was talking and articulating with her hands. Yet we couldn't hear a sound fleeing from her lips. As abruptly as she sat, the figure stood up, once again revealing its full height. A branch-like hand placed something on the table before turning herself towards the hallway. It was then that I yet again looked through binoculars just as it began to walk. I was too craven to look at her profile, so I instinctively looked downwards, towards her legs. It was then that I found out that this thing walked not with legs, but with hooves. As the thing disappeared into the hallways, a sudden surge of bravery befell me and I attempted to see what was it that was placed on the table. My noble attempt was late, though. Whatever it was, Ashley's mother clasped it with both hands in a protective manner. She slid it over to herself and stood up. Just then, a hard, impatient knock struck against the door. I recognized it. It was him. Me and Ashley withdrew deeper into the corner, not knowing how the encounter between her father and that mysterious visitor played out. Ashley's mother swiftly left her post in the kitchen and walked over to the door, unlocking it and greeting her husband. "Hello, darlin'," she almost sang. "Had a good day at work?" "Stop pretending to care. Damn whore. Give me something to eat," he growled. We heard the sound of his heavy work boots echo through the hallway. "Of course, love," she replied in that uncanny, melodic voice as if he just sang her a ballad. He seated himself at the same spot where the visitor was. Ashley's mother placed a place in front of him and walked over to the door, looking at us. "Papa needs some alone time. You kids will eat in the living room. I'll bring you food in a moment," she explained before shutting the door. Before she closed it, I took one last look at the table. The vase was nowhere to be seen. We sat there in the corner, talking in hushed voices about what we had just seen. Then, our conversation was interrupted by a loud crash. Ah, yes. The beginning of a fight. It seemed that the chain of events was restored. It was now time for the most disturbing part. The part where Ashley's mother would start screaming. We sat there in silence, waiting for it to begin. It began. Yet these screams were deeper, guttural screams. Incoherent mutters and gurgling sounds were all incorporated into some disgusting symphony. Ever so slightly, I edged towards that door. A peek through the keyhole was my goal. Sliding across the floorboards, I could not even begin to imagine what I would see there. I raised myself up on my knees, looked back towards Ashley, took a deep breath and placed my eye over the keyhole. Ashley's father was sitting on a table, his bare chest exposed. He utilized the knife and fork for the task of tearing his own flesh and stuffing it into his mouth. Chewing between the whispers of absolute agony, the hands continued, scrap after scrap. It seemed that they had a will of their own. I don't know how long I looked. I only know I looked away after his hands slid deep into his eye sockets and removed the eyeballs. The frantic movements of his neck told me that he had already swallowed the flesh and was ready for the next course. Last thing I saw through that keyhole before I stood up and ran across the living room to the door was Ashley's mom in the corner, smoking a cigarette, her thin, placid lips contorted in a satisfied smile. Luckily, Ashley's mother formed a habit of leaving a key in the door after her husband bashed her face in. One day, for taking too long to open it, I unlocked the door and ran, not looking back. I didn't see Ashley after that day. I saw worried faces and hushed conversations of other parents when mine would drop me off at school. Police arrived and questioned me. I explained to them that I was at Ashley's that day. The police and my parents exchanged worried glances. Their faces eased up after I told them that Ashley and I had a fight, and I left almost immediately after arriving and walked to the park where I played on the swings alone. I repressed memories of that day. I had almost forgotten them. I grew up and got married to the love of my life. The memories came back the first time he hit me. Ever so slowly, they returned. The tall, feminine figure. The man devouring himself. Then, this morning, after he splashed hot coffee at me for putting too much sugar in it before he left the house, I walked upstairs to our bedroom, wailing in agony, betrayal hurting me more than the actual scalding liquid. There on the nightstand stood a single black rose in a small vase.